Okay, now it's time to make the stem. So here's my stem material here. And what I'll do is I'll put this in the lathe and face this so they're at 90 degrees and smooth. Here's my Delrin rod tenon. And I buy the tenon or the Delrin rod in large rods, then just cut them as I make them. You'll notice that this one I've already kind of shaped the tip of it. There's a slight angle on that. What I'm trying to do, it's not exact, but kind of get in the angle so then when it's seated in the mortise, see how we have these angles here, so it kind of sits in there instead of having a larger gap. So first, I already have my bit kind of marked with painter's tape on how deep I'm going to go. Have my epoxy ready. So now I'll go ahead and put it on the lathe. When I was making the previous video drilling the pipe, I failed to show one step, and that's with the tenon. Before I start the stem, what I do is I check up the Delrin rod tenon on the lathe. I face one end and then I drill just a really small hole. It doesn't matter, just as long as it's, you know, smaller than your airway. And what I do, I drill that hole because, okay, say if this is the stem material here. I'll drill the mortise first before I drill the airway, because what I want to do is, you know, coat the inside with epoxy, and then, you know, I have my tenon that has kind of roughed up exterior surface here so it'll grip. Then I coat this with epoxy. Then when I push this in, I want the epoxy to fill any little voids, so tobacco, you know, liquid, anything doesn't get trapped in here. So when I push this in, it's actually going to push a little bit of epoxy back out this way. And also, if you don't drill this air hole, what's going to happen is when you try pushing this Delrin rod tenon in, it's going to have too much air pressure in here. You're going to have a tight seal with the epoxy on both sides, and you're not going to be able to compress that air. So with this small hole, this relieves the pressure so you can get it seated all the way in. And the epoxy will fill any little voids. I mean, there shouldn't be this much of a void, but it'll fill any little voids. So just wanted to show that. And also, when I grind my Delrin rod tenon, this is the end that's going to actually go in, I try to match the angle of my drill bit for drilling the mortise. This way, I want to maximize the surface area, you know, in contact with the stem, and then also I want to have, you know, the smallest gap possible down here on this end. So that was the one little part I just wanted to point out. Okay, I have this chucked up in. Make sure it's tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and face this. And it looks like I need to drop my height down a little bit to center. And I'm just going to check this real quick. Yeah, a little more. Okay, now that that's faced, I can come in here my centering bit. This just gives me a nice centered hole to do the rest of the drilling from. Okay, now I could actually drill my mortise. Okay, now that this is drilled, I'm going to go ahead and get the tenon ready to put in the delvin rod. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end of this bit here, and I'm just going to create kind of like a scored little line in here. Just something extra for the epoxy to grab onto, because we don't want our tenons coming loose when someone tries removing the stem from the pipe. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take some rough sandpaper in that same bit and cut a couple little grooves in here just to rough it up. This way it gives the epoxy something to bond on to. Okay, I have the tenon ready to go in, and actually in making this video I forgot a step that I always do, and that's to drill a little tiny pilot hole in my tenon. And what that does, that little hole that runs through the tenon, that relieves pressure, because now I've got a tight seal, so I'm trying to compress air. So the tenon isn't going to push in until I actually drill this hole and relieve the pressure. See if I can get some of this excess epoxy off the edge real quick, so when I start the lathe up it doesn't start slinging it everywhere. Okay, now that hole runs through. So what I'm going to do is take this bit out. And get a little paper towel to protect this. And now I'm just going to tap it in. See, now I can actually tap it in that this hole relieves the pressure. Okay. Now just wipe off that epoxy. Now I just need to let this set. Once the epoxy sets, I'll come back to the next steps. Okay. Okay, now that the glue is dry on the tenon, I just went through and I faced the tenon. And I'm going to go ahead and use the center bit here just to start my hole. Okay, now what I'm going to do is going to drill a pilot hole using this bit. And I am going to lock the tailstock down just to make sure that it's dead center. And let's see, appears that I didn't lock this down. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and drill the airway. And I do have this marked for my depth. And what I'm going to do is, since I have that pilot hole started, I'm just going to, instead of cranking this forward, I'm just going to push it forward. Okay, so the airway is now drilled. Now I'm going to go ahead, I think that the tenon is a little bit long, but I'm going to check it. And it needs, about a little less than 1/8 of an inch taken off. And I'll now check and see if it took enough off. I don't want to take too much off because I don't want there to be a gap between the tenon and the bottom of the mortise hole. Okay, I just need the slightest bit taken off still. Okay, and then I'm going to just take and just slightly take this edge off the tenon. Okay, now I think our depth is correct. I'm going to do one more check. Yep, perfect fit now. So now what I'm going to do is come in and use countersink to put bevel on that corner there. Get this out of the way. And I'm going to lock this down so I can crank it, just because Delrin rod is so soft. When you're pushing it, it's easy to push and go too far. Okay. So this end is now complete. So now what I'm going to do is turn the stem around and drill the hole for the airway. Yeah, I'll come in here and I'll quickly face this. Now to drill the final hole on the stem. And I'll come in with a small centering bit here. Now to put in a small bit for the airway. And this will drill in and meet where that taper drill stops, right about in here. Move this back just so I don't run into it. And there I'm already through. Okay, so now I have the stem. Fits nice and snug. Oops, sorry about that. The stem fits nice and snug. So now what I think I'm going to do is chuck the pipe back up. I could have made the stem first, but I chose to do it this way. You know, since I don't do this for a living, I don't have like a real set way that I do it. But I think on this, I'm going to go ahead and chuck this back up into the briar chuck. Then I can put my live center in this hole. So then I can take the briar down here to match the diameter of the stem. and my next video I'll be showing that. Okay, I now have the block back in the chuck. I put a live center on, which is in the airway hole. So now let's see, checking my clearance here. Okay, now I can start removing the briar to meet the stem here. Okay, I have the stem on the pipe and everything chucked up. I have the live center here in the air hole. So now I'm just kind of profiling the stem a little bit. And then I'll take some sandpaper to it in a minute here. Just start cleaning it up so it's pretty much close to sanded and finished up at the top portion here. Okay, it's pretty good. I need to go ahead and sharpen up my tool. Cut isn't as clean as I want, so when you're working with a metal lathe, you always have to keep these just razor sharp, especially working with acrylics or with like the Cumberland ebonite type stems. Okay, just took this off the lathe, so now I have the stem and the shank matched up. And really my next step now is take it to the French wheel to start my actual shaping.